It's more than I ever had wished for, you and me. I'm so lucky you found me. Now we're two hearts will be as one. I'm so lucky I got lucky with you. I'm so happy I got lucky. I keep winning when you're around. I'm so lucky I got lucky, lucky with you. Lucky with you. Lucky with you. Lucky with you.
Hey everybody, this is Richard Sachs. I'm your host on Lost Arts Radio. This is our show for Sunday, the 21st day of January 2018. Thanks for being with us. I really appreciate your sharing your time, and we've got a fantastic show tonight that I've actually been looking forward to for quite a while, and part of the reason I'll explain to you is because we've been talking about fasting for years, actually, on this program and in other venues. And the reason is because it's been known for thousands of years to have a universal healing effect, almost regardless of what's wrong with the body. I mean, you can't really use it for immediate cures in traumatic injury, but almost every kind of disease situation, fasting has been found to be helpful, and this has been taught for thousands of years. And in modern times, it's not used much as far as the mainstream medical industry is concerned, but there's a place in California called True North Health Center that is using it under really high qualified supervision and getting a lot of wonderful results for patients fortunate enough to go there. And this place was founded by a chiropractor who's also an osteopath named Dr. Alan Goldhamer, Goldhamer. And as the founder of True North and the guy who set up all of these interlocking therapeutic modalities that are there for patients, physical therapy and massage and all kinds of other things, I thought it'd be great if he would ever come on and talk to us, one-on-one at Lost Arts Radio. So we actually get that privilege tonight, and I want to just welcome Dr. Goldhamer and let you know that I greatly appreciate the time.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be good. So what I want to do, as is our habit on these shows, since they're educational forums and like a mini class kind of that we're getting into right away, is to go back for people that don't know anything about fasting or the kind of things we're going to be talking about, and go back before you got involved in this, maybe, and talk about what led you to go to chiropractic college, and then how you added your other credential and what happened in Australia, what led up to the founding of True North, and then we'll get into what you're doing now.
Sure. Well, I was frustrated when I was young because my best friend, Doug Lyle, used to beat me mercilessly when we played basketball, and I really wanted to find a way to beat him. And I practiced, but he practiced and didn't seem to help. And so finally I thought maybe if I could get healthier than he was, I might be able to get an edge and crush him. Mm-hmm. So I began reading. I came across Herbert Shelton and some of the natural hygiene materials, and it made a lot of sense that health was the result of healthful living. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, I would adopt healthful living habits in terms of a whole food, plant-based diet. I would, do the appropriate exercise, stretching, and strengthening, and I would get good enough that I could finally beat him. Mm-hmm. The problem was, he adopted the same diet and lifestyle changes that I did, and to this day, he still crushes me every time we play. So it was a complete and total failure.
Wow. Okay.
But nonetheless, I still hope that, now this is some 45 years later, I'm hoping that as we age, perhaps he'll age slightly faster than I am. So eventually I might be able to beat him. But
okay, so there's still a chance.
There's a chance, but it's getting slim and none. Nonetheless, having gotten involved in this, it made me interested. I met Gerald Benish, who was a doctor that did fasting supervision, and he told me that his job was the best job in the world because the patients did all the work, the body did all the healing, and all he had to do was take credit for the good results. And I decided that was the job for me.
Sounds great.
So I went to chiropractic college and then to osteopathic college, where I had a chance to study in Australia with Alec Burton, who had a lot of experience using medically supervised water fasting and treating chronic degenerative disease. Came back 33 years ago with my wife, Dr. Moran, and we opened up the True North Health Center. We've been doing this ever since then. So in the last 33 years, we've had 16,000 people that have undergone water-only fasting, and now we're, trying to move the True North Health Foundation's research agenda forward and document what we're doing and try to figure out how to do it better.
Wow, fantastic summary. Okay, so when you came to set up True North Health Center, what was the process of setting it up like, and your reception with the medical community and the state agencies and things like that?
Well, we had a lot of challenges. You can imagine back then, California Board of Medical Quality Assurance at that time that represented the medical profession said that recommending fasting was such a gross violation of the standard of medical practice that it actually rose to the level of criminal negligence. I was actually the first person in my family ever to require the services of a criminal defense attorney. My father was so proud.
Wow.
But, that was a while ago now. We've gone from being quacks to being cutting-edge researchers because fasting's gained some attention, and there's been a bunch of stuff published by people like Luigi Fontana and Walter Longo and others in the mainstream literature, as well as ourselves. And so now fasting is seen as kind of innovative and interesting because it turns out it's a very powerful and effective tool at reversing some of the things associated with aging and reversing the consequences of disease and debility.
Right. When you were just starting out and you said you were talking about needing the services of the defense attorney, who was suing you? Was that the state government trying to stop you from setting this up?
Well, it was actually the medical board had determined that this was an outrageous behavior to recommend fasting to patients.
Right.
And they suggested that
not only would they have their disease, but they'd starve to death at the same time, right?
It was so outrageous that it was, in fact, rose to the level of where potential criminal charges could be brought. And that's where the criminal defense attorney came in to represent us against those. Now, of course, they eventually backed away because it turns out, even at that time, fasting was used by every hospital in the country to treat various conditions like acute pancreatitis. That there was even a provision in Medicare at that time to reimburse for fasting, so long as it was rapid weight loss for urgent surgery. If you got well, of course, it wasn't covered, but, So
did they stop covering that now, or is it still there?
Oh, I'm not sure. I haven't looked at Medicare reimbursement issues for a long time, so I don't know if it's still a provision, but it was at one time.
Do you guys work with the insurance system, or are you strictly cash on the outside?
Our initial exams with our medical doctors, any laboratory work was generally covered, just like it would be seeing any physician. The actual daily rate at the center in our facility, which starts at $149 a night, is not covered. So I suppose if people wanted to have all their organs cut out or something, there's probably a provision.
Well, that would be covered for sure.
Yeah, getting well is not part of the standard.
Right.
When you think about medicine, if you have the conditions we treat, things like metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, diabetes, autoimmune disorders like arthritis, colitis, lupus, asthma, lymphoma, these conditions, if you treat them medically, the only thing they'll guarantee you is that you'll never get well. The doctors will tell you you'll be on drugs the rest of your life, and they'll promise you'll be sick forever. So our approach is a little different because we're saying if you're willing to do really dangerous and radical things like eat good and exercise and go to bed on time, you can actually overcome these problems, eliminate the need for medications in many cases, and actually restore health. Now, the problem is we're dealing with the actual causes of disease rather than the leading causes of death and disability. In other words, heart disease, cancer, and stroke are the leading cause of death and disability. But the actual causes of death, the reason people get heart disease, cancer, and stroke is because they smoke cigarettes, they drink alcohol, and they eat meat and highly processed foods.
Right.
So by getting rid of the actual causes of disease, we can avoid, delay, or defer the development of the leading cause of death and avoid the 18 years of debility that the average people experience in terms of disease and debility in the last decades of life.
So what's really inspiring is not only the explanation, but the fact that you're willing to say these things publicly.
Well, I mean, you can't deny them. I mean, the fact is that people are spending 9.4 years debilitated, over 17 years suffering as a consequence of ill health, and that's where most of the money on healthcare spent. We can discuss one-payer, two-payer, six-payer systems. You can do whatever you want, but unless we do something to promote health and reduce this epidemic of chronic degenerative disease, particularly things like diabetes and cardiovascular disease, it's not going to matter what kind of healthcare system you put together. It'll collapse under the weight of an increasing geometric population that's becoming fatter and sicker by the day.
Right. So when you look, you look at the economics of the system, which is to a large degree what's keeping the current system in place, I think, because it's a fantastic business model as long as everybody stays sick. If the interests that are against changing that don't want to lose $3 trillion a year, I suspect that's part of it. And if you set up a system that is based on addressing the real causes of disease and health, what does the economics of that look like?
I think even more than well-meaning but misguided physicians trying desperately to figure out what to do in dealing with sick people, the real issue is you have an industry that's basically designed to give people what they want. And what they want is the artificial stimulation of dopamine in their brain associated with the pleasure that comes from things like eating highly processed foods that artificially stimulate that production and give them pleasure. So people want the animal foods and the sugar, oil, and salt because it makes them feel good in the short run. In the long run, of course, it leads to terrible consequences. The medical profession comes along and is basically part of the pleasure trap because they're trying to give people relief from the symptoms without necessarily having to deal with the causes.
So this reminds me of a book I just read called The Pleasure Trap that maybe you could kind of talk about and segue into that, because I think all those issues are the subject of that book.
Well, what a small world, because The Pleasure Trap is my favorite book.
Okay,
and
great.
Its subtitle is Mastering the Hidden Force That Undermines Health and Happiness. And the basic premise is that people are fat, sick, and miserable because they're putting chemicals in their food that artificially stimulate dopamine production in their brain. And those chemicals are salt, oil, and sugar. SOS, the international symbol of danger, and stands for salt, oil, and sugar. So because we put these chemicals in our food, our brains, stimulate more dopamine, we get more pleasure, we eat more, and we develop the diseases of dietary excess. And that's what obesity and cardiovascular disease and diabetes and autoimmune disease and some forms of cancer are. Direct consequences of eating more than we can efficiently process.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, if you want to reverse the disease, you have to stop putting those chemicals in your mouth. And all we've done is taken this ancient practice called fasting as a way of making that transition from dietary excess to normalcy happen quicker. That's all fasting does, is it gives the body a chance to do what it does best, and that's heal itself.
So it's really not the fasting that's some kind of a cure. It's just allowing the cure to be done by the body, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Fasting is nothing more than a pathway to give the body a chance to do what it needs to do, which is get rid of the accumulated and intermediate products of metabolism inside the cells that got there because you ate too much.
So you said everybody's fat, sick, and miserable or something, I'm not sure, in some order like that. What about the relative minority that is skinny, sick, and miserable?
Not everything is associated with dietary excess, and not every condition, for example, responds to fasting. There are a number of conditions that are not tied to dietary excess, but currently these are the conditions that the common conditions that we know are associated with dietary excess are obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, most of the autoimmune diseases, and some forms of cancer. And that represents, somewhere between 70 and 85% of the people that are getting sick prematurely.
Right.
So, but there are definitely other neurologically mediated conditions and other problems, genetically mediated conditions that are not tied to this. So that's why you can't say fasting is good for everything. It's not. It's good for conditions associated with dietary excess. So in a society where 71 or 72% of people are overweight or obese, it's not surprising to find that a wide variety of people and conditions respond to this process of fasting.
What about if somebody is eating all processed junk food but not very much of it?
There are some people that can eat processed junk food and not get fat because they have very sensitive satiety mechanisms, just like there's some people that can drink alcohol and not become a drunk. But if you're a drunk, that's not you. And if you're overweight, it's probably not you.
Right, but I'm asking if those people could benefit from what you're doing.
Well, anybody that changes from eating a unhealthy diet to eating a healthy diet is likely to get some benefit. It may not be quite as apparent in thinner people because they don't have a lot of weight to lose, or they don't have necessarily those particular diseases. But many people that are thin eating terrible foods, although they may not be overeating those foods enough to get fat, they still are causing irreparable harm to their internal functions. And so they may have diseases that are not necessarily diseases of excess, but diseases, for example, of deficiency and or dysfunction.
Right, and I assume toxicity too, right, if they're eating all poison junk.
Well, unfortunately, most people, even people trying to eat healthy, often have toxicity issues because they're still breathing the air, drinking the water, and being exposed to drugs and other processes. So most human beings anywhere on the planet now, if you do a fat biopsy and liquefy it, analyze it, you'll find there's hundreds of different chemicals in various concentrations. And those chemicals can accumulate within the cells and eventually interfere with cellular production and function and are thought to be part of the aging and disease process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, what's interesting, if you track back how those chemicals got there, there's one behavior more responsible than any other for the accumulation of the majority of toxins in the body of human beings, and that is the habit of eating animal products. Mm-hmm. Because it turns out that meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products all have this issue of biological concentration, where materials accumulate day after day after week after month inside the animal tissues, and when you kill and eat the animal or eat its byproducts, you get its entire lifetime accumulation of material. So a calorie of animal food could have anywhere from 2 to 1,000 times the concentration of various chemicals compared to a calorie of plant-based foods. So one thing adopting a whole plant food, sugar, oil, salt-free diet does is it eliminates one of the major sources of contamination that people are getting, which is the consumption of animal-based foods.
When you're looking at detoxification, once people start to consider that may be a necessary thing to do to get healthy, how would you contrast the mechanism of detoxification that happens with popular products sold for that purpose versus fasting?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of the people selling these popular products will tell you that fasting is dangerous because the body so efficiently detoxifies itself that it would overwhelm the organ's abilities to handle it, and therefore you should never do that unless you take their proprietary products, and then everything's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just fortunately.
So it's a crock of crap as far as I'm concerned. The fact is the body is very efficient at mobilizing and eliminating materials in fasting, and the idea that you have to take proprietary products in order to regulate this long established evolutionary pathways just seems absurd.
Yeah, it means nobody in prior ages could have gotten the benefit from fasting because they didn't have the products yet. Right?
Well, and also we've done 16,000 fasts and published the data on many of those patients' experiences, and I have yet to see any data that suggests that doing anything works better than doing nothing when you do it properly.
Yeah, exactly. It's unlikely that you were just lucky that they didn't all die from starvation or something.
Yeah, that's right. We've had a fasting safety study, in fact, that we just recently have submitted for publication, which tracks 5 years, all consecutive patients. And one of the things that, these patients had chief complaints ranging from cardiovascular disease to endocrine, metabolic, neurological disorders on down the list. And we were able to show that this process is safe and useful without any mortality, at least in this particular subject population of 5,949. Well, excuse me, we had 5 years of data with 768 different patients and over 6,265 total fasting days. So I don't think it's just coincidence that it can be done safely. We do have a strict protocol that needs to be followed, and it is done, I might mention, under medical supervision.
So do you guys use any form of colon hydrotherapy while you're doing the fast or not?
Well, the way we do that is we get people to eat properly before they fast. That's very important. And so the bowels are evacuating. We don't have to go and do bowel laundry stuff or intervention. In certainly less than 1% of cases is any type of bowel intervention necessary. There are very rare situations where we do use a colon hydrotherapy or we'll use an enema or some kind of manipulation for specific patients, but it's not a routine thing. And again, 99% of people, we don't do any bowel manipulation.
I know Shelton. I read a couple of his books getting ready to talk to you, and I know that he wasn't using enemas as far as I could tell.
Well, he started off in his career using enemas, and he found that they were actually counterproductive, that patients had a better net clinical result not doing a lot of this autonomic stimulation. And so he abandoned it. And since then, almost all of the doctors that have extensive experience with fasting use it, if at all, very, very rarely or conservatively.
Okay. So, and what about cases? I know that you do a lot with blood pressure and diabetes and things like that. I assume that you know Gabriel Cousens. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
He's been on the show too, and I know that he's done a lot of interesting stuff with diabetes and fasting. And but I was wondering, what kind of experience have you had? Because I think you've had some with people coming in with different kinds of benign or malignant tumors of various kinds.
Well, you've talked about three things there. We've certainly done a lot of work with hypertension. In fact, we've published a paper in the literature with T. Colin Campbell, who was a professor at Cornell University, where we took 174 consecutive patients with high blood pressure, and 174 people were able to eliminate their need for medication. We have the largest effect size that's ever been shown in the scientific literature in treating high blood pressure in humans, with an average effect size of over 60 points. And for those people that start with stage 3 hypertension, so it's at least 180 or higher systolic blood pressure, their average blood pressure drop exceeds 60 points.
Wow.
It's really phenomenal. And so virtually everybody we're seeing with essential hypertension will have a reduction in blood pressure, and the vast majority of people we treat will normalize their pressure entirely, eliminating the need for medication. Now, problem with this, just like the problem with treating obesity or diabetes or any of these other diseases, is you don't cure them, you manage them. You can't cure obesity. If they go back to eating greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, clean flesh, they get fat again. And if you go back to salty, processed foods, your blood pressure will eventually go up again. But to the degree that people are willing to live healthfully, they can sustain those results essentially indefinitely. And so this high blood pressure, which is the leading contributing cause of death and disability currently in the United States, is in fact a highly manageable condition and does not require the use of pharmaceuticals in the vast majority of cases.
Right. And now, say just one thing. Say what you said just a minute ago again. It's the leading cause of hypertension is the leading cause of
blood pressure. And its associated conditions are the leading contributing cause of death and disability in the United States right now, with the majority of people that reach 65 having high blood pressure.
Okay.
In fact, it's so high that, if you don't have hypertension by the time you're 65, you're technically abnormal.
Yeah, exactly. I've noticed the same thing. So what do you think, in less than 10 hours of explanation, what do you think causes high blood pressure in all these people?
There's actually a number of different causes for hypertension. We know, for example, weight. For every kilogram of weight that people lose, there's a 1.6 drop in systolic blood pressure. A vegetarian high-fiber diet will lower blood pressure an average of 2.8 points, and alcohol reduction eliminates blood pressure 4.8 points. It turns out alcohol is not health food. It's a major contributing cause of hypertension. People that don't exercise, if you add exercise into the mix, it drops blood pressure an average of 7 to 8 points. Right. Sodium restriction, which is probably the single biggest factor, eating too much sodium, because we're adding sodium to the diet rather than just the natural sodium in the food. That's about a 16-point drop. And then, of course, if you utilize medically supervised water-only fasting, average effect size is 37 across the board, 60 points in stage 3 hypertension. So being fat, eating salt, drinking alcohol, not exercising, all of these factors contribute to hypertension. The factors, the high-fat diets and high animal protein diets that lead to atherogenesis, where you plug up your blood vessels with fat, that increases blood pressure. Too much stress in the diet can cause autonomic stimulation and vasoconstriction. That can increase blood pressure. So it's not just one thing, it's all these things. And that's why a comprehensive diet and lifestyle program works so well. Because you're getting all different things. You're losing the weight, you're dropping the sugar, you're dropping the alcohol, you're opening up the vessels, normalizing autonomic tone. All of these things are helpful in normalizing blood pressure.
Do you think the reason that overweight people, everything else being equal, have higher blood pressure as a rule is because of just the number of miles of capillaries that the blood has to be pumped through?
No, it's the number of pounds of fat in those capillaries that's the issue. So it's not
inside the capillaries.
Inside the capillaries. It's a fat inside the vessels that narrow. Think about a hose. If you stick your finger over the end of a hose, the pressure goes up.
All right.
The water squirts out farther. You're doing the same thing when you plug up your blood vessels with fat. Or if you're under stress and the muscles, the smooth muscles that regulate your flow, constrict, it narrows the chamber. Anything that narrows the chamber increases the pressure inside the chamber.
And so the reason it's correlated with weight is that there's more miles of those plugged up capillaries in an overweight person than a regular.
Sure, you don't get weight accidentally. You don't go to sleep and wake up fat. You have to earn it. It takes tremendous discipline. You have to consistently overeat in order to put on those extra pounds of tissue.
Right.
And some of that fat is stored inside the vessels. The diet you eat that makes you fat is what helps contribute to hypertension. Now, what's interesting is once you change the diet, long before all the fat's gone, blood pressure starts dropping rapidly. So it's not even the fat per se, as much as the diet that causes you to be fat that's the major contributing factor. So, you can get normal blood pressure and still be fat as long as you're on a diet that allows you naturally over time to reduce that dietary excess.
So the fat is maybe just one of many long-term side effects?
Absolutely.
What about people who have a really low body fat percentage, like very heavy bodybuilders?
What about them? They can still plug up their blood vessels. And
that's what I would think. Yeah, they're not eating low-fat diets at all. So I would suspect that once they start to age a little bit, they'd have a lot of the trouble that you're talking about.
Well, I mean, you look at what happens to NFL linemen. They're dying in their late 50s on average. It's a tremendous problems with cardiovascular disease and other problems, even though they were at the time quite fit. But by the time you eat that diet and take those steroids, it's probably not good for your health.
Yeah, it's hard to put on an extra 100 pounds of muscle unless you do some unusual things.
Yeah, it's yeah.
So okay, so now back to the idea of the malignancies. What happens when? I mean, first of all, what's going on with those, and how do they respond to fasting?
Well, I'll give you, we did publish a case report in the British Medical Journal just in December. I can share with you that case is a good example.
Is that the lymphoma one?
It is.
I read it, yeah.
Yeah, so that was an interesting case because this was a woman who was young with stage 3 follicular lymphoma. And she had been under care for a couple years. They hadn't yet started aggressive medical intervention because in this particular type of cancer, treatment's not overwhelmingly effective, does have a lot of side effects, so they often will defer, until such time as there's no choice.
Yeah.
And she had gotten to the point where she wasn't really functional anymore, and so they had recommended that she begin chemotherapy or radiation to try to treat her condition, which she resisted. She wasn't interested in doing that, so she talked to her doctor about what about alternatives. And her physician assured her there really weren't any alternatives. The diet had nothing to do with this particular type of cancer. She asked him about fasting. He told her that was like criminal quackery.
Yeah.
So that wasn't accepted. She saw the oncologist, asked him. He also conferred that probably diet didn't have a lot to do with, that particular type of cancer, that, she'd gotten to the point where it was probably reasonable to begin doing treatment. But despite that, she decided to come in and give water fasting a trial. And
she had heard about your place, I guess, right? She
knew somebody that had successful treatment, I believe, with rheumatoid arthritis. So she was 42 years old, had palpable lesions upper and lower, so we could feel these tumors externally, which was actually kind of convenient. We had something we could monitor.
Yeah, now just for people that don't know, what does lymphoma look like? I mean, what kind of symptoms and how does it develop?
Large tumors in the lymph, in her case, upper and lower extremity, with thus stage 3 diagnosis. She'd had.
So you get swollen lymph nodes, in other words.
Yeah, you can feel these masses.
Okay.
I mean, they're 34 by 22 millimeters, 22 by 16 millimeters, large, easily palpated masses. And she had confirmed this with CT-guided core biopsy. She had surgical excisional biopsy to confirm the diagnosis. Her flow cytometry showed CD-positive monocyte B cells making up, they said, 15% of her specimen. So I don't think there was any debate about the diagnosis.
Pretty advanced.
So she came in, she did 21 days of water-only fasting in our inpatient facility, and during which time her tumors disappeared. So we could no longer feel any of the tumors.
Right.
She refed for half the length of the fast, which was 10 days, and we sent her back to the oncologist. And he examined her a few times and, finally asked her what happened. And she told him that she had gone to the criminal quacks and done the long-term water fasting, and her tumors went away. And he said,
spontaneous remission, right?
I will have to give them a call. And then she asked him for a follow-up CT scan, and he denied that. He said she didn't need any more scans, that she was better now. And but she insisted. We'd given her a little coaching, and she managed to get him to do the follow-up CT, which we needed to confirm it.
Right.
He did tell her that she still had a little bit of low white count, and that maybe she could consider some gentle chemotherapy, which she refused. And at 2 months, she had continued to lose weight. She followed the diet. At 12 months, her white counts were completely normal. At that point, we did a follow-up scan, and it was clear that she had made dramatic improvements. And so we decided to write a case report up. So we finally did. We submitted to British Medical Journal, and after some back and forth, they agreed to publish it. I'd written to the oncologist. I'd told him that I thanked him so much for all the confidence he showed in referring his patient to us for fasting, and that I was sure that he was going to be happy to cooperate with us in the years to come and track our good progress. But now that our paper had been accepted for publication in the British Medical Journal, I thought he might like to sign on as co-author, since he was the primary oncologist.
What an interesting strategy. That's great.
Yeah, it's been 2 years. I still haven't heard back from him, but I'm sure he's just probably busy.
But he hasn't done any overt attacking or anything. She
complied, and she's continued to comply. I just saw her a week ago, 2-year follow-up. Now her CT shows she's completely cancer-free. She's maintained her weight loss. She's complied with the diet. And, we're going to follow up with another case report. Now, but since then, we've accepted a number of other patients with lymphoma, and we've been seeing similar results. And so we're putting a cohort together, and eventually we'd like to see a clinical trial done. Because this is a condition that there's not a really good medical option, and we believe that we have a better approach. And so I think it warrants a clinical trial.
Well, you had a little bit of an advantage, too, because they hadn't yet messed her up with chemotherapy and radiation, right?
Well, she had not undergone treatment, which definitely is a potential advantage. If you do undergo treatment, of course, they'll attribute any benefit to the treatment they had.
Yeah.
So,
and the benefit's harder to get too if you've really hurt the patient.
Well, we don't know that for sure because we haven't done a study yet, but it does look that way. It does appear that that's the case. But again, I think health is a result of healthful living. Healthful living can be applied anytime, whether it's before, during, or after treatment. Right. Now, since then, Walter Longo has been publishing some data showing that if you combine fasting with chemotherapy, you get dramatically enhanced cancer-free survival. Because it turns out in the fasting state, cancer cells don't like the fasting state. They're probably because of their higher metabolic rate. Mm-hmm. And in the fasting state, healthy cells are protected from the ravages of chemotherapy. So fasting has a two-pronged benefit. It protects healthy cells and it makes cancer cells more vulnerable to conventional treatment. And so that's why now there's some interest in some pharmaceutical quarters trying to come up with what they call our fasting mimic drugs.
Yeah, so exactly.
It would do to your body what fasting does, but without having the nasty fasting behavior.
Exactly. If you use the old-fashioned fasting, you can't even patent it.
Yeah, well, there's nothing to sell. We're not doing anything.
Yeah, exactly. The rates that you mentioned of $149 for staying at your place are really cheap. I mean,
well, we're a third or a quarter of the cost of many places because we are a 501c3 nonprofit-driven organization. We are public education research focused, and so we don't have the pressures that a lot of places have financially. We have a bunch of docs that are really into seeing people get well. Because you remember, if you're a medical doctor and you're practicing conventional medicine, you hardly ever see anybody get well.
That's right. That's right.
So these doctors are all thrilled because now they actually get to see people recover.
In fact, the term cure has been pretty much eliminated in favor of permanent management, right?
Well, of course. I mean, if you're a drug manufacturer, you don't want to give somebody a drug like, say, for example, Harvoni, they take for 21 days and they're done. No, you want a drug they're on forever.
Yeah, obviously. That's much better.
Yeah, much better, much more lucrative. Yeah, you sell the patient once and then they're hooked in forever.
Right. What about other, cancers that originate in other parts of the body than the lymph system?
So we haven't published any data on cancers in other parts of the body besides this one. So I'm not prepared to comment on what we believe the outcomes are going to turn out to be because we don't have good data there yet. There's certain things
are you
that we do.
probably going to get some at some point?
Well, we're working on it now. Yeah, we're actually working on trying to do some outcome data. What we've actually published on, though, are conditions like diabetes and hypertension, obesity, and autoimmune diseases. So I think we can speak with a little more confidence there. When it comes to cancer, I'm not sure we understand what's really going on with cancer.
Well, just the fact that you've done anything with cancer is spectacular, I think, because the doctors that you had mentioned that told you it was all quackery, that kind of represents what they're all taught. You're supposed to think. The fact
that's
that you're
because there's not been any good data
food.
published. As we publish more data, I think the attitude will begin to soften and shift.
How is it getting that data into the mainstream journals?
It's inordinately difficult. This was a major accomplishment for us to get even this case report, and we'll see how we do with the cohort and eventually with the trial. But there's a specific process you have to go through if you're going to get people to accept your data and get it published, particularly in these big impact journals. It's not an easy process.
Well, they use what's called peer review to make sure that nobody outside the box gets in, I would think.
Well, I think it's to protect the public from criminal quackery, frankly.
Exactly. So, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
It's people like us that present novel ideas that are not accepted. Obviously, it's up to us to also do a good, credible job of showing that it can be done safely and effectively. That's why we're publishing safety studies. That's why we're publishing initially case reports, and now we're starting clinical trials as well. So, but it's difficult because until it's proven, nobody wants to fund it. And so you have to have, some pretty dedicated, motivated people in order to be able to do what it takes to get it done properly.
Well,
and I think we are doing that.
You've got big industries that want to make sure it does not get proven.
Yeah. I think there's some truth to that. There's people that would just as soon not have these kind of controversial issues discussed too much. If you watch that movie, What the Health, which was a lot of it was filmed at the True North Health Center. In fact, the patients that appear in it were all of my patients.
Okay.
And now I see there's disinformation coming out on that movie saying that, those people were all paid actors.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's ridiculous. Although I'm getting patients calling up saying, "Hey, I got well. How come nobody paid me?" It's like,
where's the money? Right.
You can imagine how shocked I was to find out after 30 years in practice, all my patients are actually just paid actors. It's like,
exactly. Yeah. It's kind of shocking. But you've got psychotherapists there, so you guys can get over.
Yeah, we'll have to need therapy, I guess. Yeah.
Right. So, wow. Now, one of the things I really wanted to get your feedback on is, we've gotten some really, there are reports of some really good reports on cancer, but they're doing some really weird things, like at Gonzalez's place. I mean, that's in New York, and he eliminated processed food, of course, and was doing a certain amount of detox with patients, but feeding them, at least some of them, a lot of meat. And I never really understood how that worked. Do you have any clues on that?
Yeah, I talked to the people advocating those diets rather than me, because that's not what we do. We advocate a whole plant food diet, SOS free. SOS is the international symbol of danger, and it stands for salt, oil, and sugar.
Right.
So we're the other end of the spectrum.
I'm not saying that the other one makes sense. It's just, it was kind of a mystery to me. But,
I think what you're getting into there is people are advocating ketogenic diets. So they can feed people high-fat diets. They blunt their apostatic mechanisms, just like you do in fasting. And they're trying to, and honestly, anything you do to reduce dietary excess may result in some clinical benefit. And so even, an Atkins diet or some of these kinds of things that they advocate, compared to some of the highly processed conventional standard American diets, may be somewhat less bad in some ways. I mean, let's
getting
face
rid
it,
of some processed food.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but again, that doesn't, something being less bad doesn't make it good. It just makes it less bad. So I'm not going to advocate people eat some health compromising diet just because it's somewhat less bad than some even worse health compromising diet.
Right. And ketogenic covers a lot of good and bad possible configurations of food, right?
And there's a lot of premature conclusions and a lot of speculation being made right now, usually in proportion to product sales, I might mention.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. And there's a researcher in Florida, I forget his name, he's pretty well known, and he was saying that the ketogenic diet showed fantastic potential with cancer, but other people who were using it were seeing a lot of people not improve.
Yeah.
So the results varied quite a bit. What about compliance? How do you do with that in general?
Well, I find if you have a properly motivated patient, compliance is a little bit easier, and properly motivated patients are usually ones motivated by pain, debility, fear of death.
Mm-hmm.
And so those people that are suffering with things like autoimmune disease oftentimes make good patients because their life sucks so badly they're willing to do dangerous and radical things like eat good and exercise and go to bed on time and take care of business.
Well, what happens when they start feeling better, though?
That's a problem. You have a drop-off in compliance because they're saying, now I'm better, I don't have to eat this strict diet. Now, if you get them to stand it long enough, though, they get where it's actually preferential. Mm-hmm. You taste neuroadapt, you get to the point where good foods taste good.
Right.
And now I think you get, so we have a percentage of the population, like the woman I just mentioned, that do great, and they enjoy it. They're not suffering. They're not having to be disciplined about it. But it takes a while to get there because people are addicts. They're addicted to the artificial stimulation of dopamine in their brain from the chemicals added to their food. So just like it's hard for alcoholics and cigarette smokers to give up, it's hard for people addicted to the highly processed foods to give it up.
Yeah.
They don't want to give it up. They like it. So it's a big challenge, and compliance is a big issue. We have an advantage because we have highly self-selected, intelligent, highly motivated patients. Right. So our patients tend to do quite well, but that doesn't mean you can generalize it to the population as a whole.
Okay.
It really works best in those people that really are motivated to want to be healthy.
So they've done a certain amount of self-education before that point.
Huge.
That's right.
Plus, they have to have the gumption to be willing to fast. Or go on.
Yeah, exactly. So they've got some self-control
right there. Absolutely. And we don't make any bones about it. We say fasting can be an intense and miserable experience, but the good news is if people have a good result, they forgive us for that.
Yeah, exactly. So talk about some of the difficult things that people have to go through when they fast.
Oh, fasting's awful. I mean, you get first mouth coats up and tastes like something crawls in there and dies. You can get all kinds of elimination from your mucous membranes, from your skin. You can get low back pain early in fasting, headache, nausea, vomiting, lots of symptoms of liver dumping. You can get, old chronic problems that become acute as the body goes through a kind of a self-healing crisis. Mm-hmm. You have to rest. You can't engage in your normal activities. There's nothing really about fasting that's particularly good, except that it's a quick way of giving the body a chance to heal itself. And the results are so profound, people are willing to put up with it. Now, the other thing is if you prepare properly for fasting, you can make it not so miserable. But that means eating healthfully in preparation, phasing out the medications, doing everything properly. And, most of our people actually have a relatively good time of it. But, it depends on how healthy they are and how well they prepare.
Something that is really sold as impossible, dangerous, or, otherwise bad is getting off toxic chemicals, which are called medicine, and that it's just too dangerous to stop taking all these drugs.
Yes. And in many cases, that's exactly true, that the too rapid a withdrawal of medication, for example, steroids or other things, have rebound effects that can be potentially life-threatening. And so that's why we have 5 medical doctors on our staff that are not idiots, and they go through and help people identify who's a good candidate, how to withdraw their medications appropriately, and we guide people through that process because obviously we want to maintain our safety record.
Right. And
the reason we're still here is because we are meticulous and careful about going through and trying to, guide people through this in an intelligent and proven way.
I think it's also exciting that it's not incredibly expensive to go to your place.
Well, it still adds up, though, because people are taking time off work because you can't work when you're fasting.
Right.
And even at $149 a night, some of these people are with us for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, sometimes a long time. So it's still a financial burden to people. But we've done everything we absolutely can to make it affordable. And the reason is we need people to be able to afford to stay long enough that they can get well and give us the outcome data that we need.
Exactly.
So you can charge more and you can still keep a place full. It's a better business model, but then it's shorter stays. And so one of the advantages to having a more affordable model is more people can afford it. More people can afford to do it longer. Those that have to come back, it's not a big burden. Because let's face it, our rates are not much different than staying in a hotel or whatever. And so most people perceive it as a good value because this includes not only staying there in fasting supervision or feeding and all their meals and whatnot, but also all of the associated educational programs, the doctor visits twice a day, doing their laundry, Wi-Fi access, all the things are included. So there's no surprises or anything. We try to make it so that people that, work for a living can actually come in and get well.
How many people are usually staying there at one time, patients?
We run around 60 inpatients at a time.
Okay, that's pretty good size.
So we're doing about 1,000 people a year.
Right. Okay, so I want to get into some stuff about your book. And you were mentioning that the whole addiction issue is really what it's about, I think, and the elements of that. So am I correct? And
well,
so,
it's certainly a major factor in the pleasure trap. You know, the dietary pleasure trap, similar to the drug pleasure trap, is about artificially stimulating dopamine, the neurochemical in your brain associated with pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And so the problem is these chemicals are just artificially stimulating dopamine. They get a higher intensity of short-term pleasure, and it leads to addiction. So whether it's cocaine or alcohol or heroin, or we're talking about sugar and fat, you know, it has a similar neurochemical pathway.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, granted, cocaine is more impacting than sugar is, but it's the same kind of artificial stimulation. And people are averaging 120 to 150 pounds of sugar a year. That's a lot. Now, I don't eat any of it, so somebody's eating my share as well. It's no wonder people.
Yeah, that's a lot. Wow. Okay, and so I remember, in reading through that book, you give a really good explanation of how the psychology of the whole thing works. And would you say that basically it's just a bottom line that it releases the chemical, and then when it starts going away, you want more, and that's pretty much what's going on?
Well, it's probably a little more complicated than that. Probably the best person, the co-author of the book, is Doug Lisle, who's the clinical psychologist, and he's responsible for most of the material related to psychology, certainly. And he could certainly do a more sophisticated explanation of some of the nuances. But essentially, you're right. You have this dependence that gets set up, and undoing that is a problem. It's not just physiological, though it's also psychological. You live in a society where there's tremendous social pressure about maintaining status quo. And so anytime you step outside the status quo, you piss people off. Mm-hmm. For example, if you're a woman and you lose 50 pounds and you go back to work, do you think the other women are all supportive of your success?
They're all going to be so happy that you made it.
Oh, they're going to we're so proud of you, and they want to help you and emotionally support you. I don't think so.
Right.
The truth is they go back to work and they go, oh, here she comes, that bee. And they're saying, they know why she lost weight, because she's a mate poaching whore. And they're bringing her cupcakes and telling her where's she going to get her protein, and it's not good to be a fanatic.
Yeah,
and they're not nice to her. Now, the men go and lose 50 pounds and go back to work. They don't have quite as much trouble because the other men don't notice. And if they do, they don't care.
Right.
So the men have a little easier time of it than the women do sometimes. But the bottom line is there's a tremendous pressure in society not to adopt a health-promoting diet, but rather to go along and get along with what everybody else is doing. And a lot of reinforcement is based on food. And as a consequence, you've got a real problem. Because when you're doing this diet properly, you can you sometimes can become a bit of a social outcast. And particularly, when you're successful with it, people get very resentful of your success.
Right.
And so one of the things in the pleasure trap that's really good is Dr. Lisle explains to how to develop strategies to be successful but not piss everybody else off around you. How to go along and get along without becoming a complete social outcast.
Right. Yeah, that would be very useful. Now, you said Dr. Doug Lisle. That's not your old basketball nemesis, is it?
It is. It turns out that Dr. Lisle is the clinical psychologist at the True North Health Center and is the principal author of The Pleasure Trap, and is intimately involved in all of the work that we've been doing for the last 33 years.
Okay.
And he's still beating me in basketball, but other than that, he's a really good guy.
He's a good person otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, a very good person. He's been my best friend since 4th grade.
Wow. How neat to get to work with him.
Yeah.
It's like a good setup.
Still would like to beat him, but it's okay.
Yeah, except for that, right.
Yeah, except for that.
What about people who are kind of in touch with you, but try to do some of the water fasting on their own? Do they ever get some benefit from that, or what do you tell people?
Well, what I tell people is there is a version of fasting they can do on their own safely. It's intermittent fasting. And with intermittent fasting, what you're doing is you're limiting the feeding window. So you don't eat breakfast, say, before a certain time in the morning, and don't eat dinner after a certain time at night. And that way you get 12, 14, or even 16 hours a day of fasting every day, but without putting yourself at risk. You can also reduce your caloric intake maybe 1 day or 2 days a week if you can rest to 600 calories. Maybe you eat just fruits and vegetables raw only. And as a consequence, that can facilitate weight loss. Both of these techniques are thought to be helpful in people reducing their total caloric intake. What we don't recommend is people do prolonged water-only fasting on their own, or that they do any of this without talking to their doctors if they're on medications, because these can profoundly affect the amount of medication you need to be on. For example, if you adopt a healthy diet and you're on conventional medication, you can sometimes shut your system down because you're on too much drugs for your diet. In other words, people are being medicated.
Relatively speaking, the dose goes up, right?
Absolutely, because what's going on is people are being drugged for their diets, not their condition. And when you change the diet, you often can dramatically reduce the amount of medication necessary. And if you don't, the effect of too much medication can be very serious. So, as a consequence, I recommend you work with a doctor that's not an idiot, that's willing to support you in making a transition to healthful living and eating. And that way, as you improve your situation and you do lose weight, you won't end up being screwed up by having too much drugs in your system at that time. And that's particularly true with water-only fasting. That needs to be done in a controlled setting under supervision. And the first thing that gets done is a proper history and exam. Make sure you're a good candidate, that you're monitored on a daily basis to make sure that we can tell the difference between a good thing, like a healing crisis, and a bad thing, which could be a problem. And that you, most importantly, you recover properly. There's a program you need to go through as you recover after fasting with feeding to avoid refeeding syndrome and food shock and post-fasting edema and all the other things that happen to people that when they sometimes fast and then go out and eat the wrong stuff. So water fasting, best done under supervision. There's lots of procedures we recommend be done under supervision. For example, appendectomy. People could probably get an internet course and teach them how to do their own appendectomy. We wouldn't recommend it because the outcomes are going to be poor. So intermittent fasting, maybe
you get really distracted when you make the first cut too. But
so intermittent fasting is slower. It's not quite as dramatic as long-term water fasting, but you can still get where you need to go safely. And you can do it without having to have the level of supervision that's necessary for long-term water-only fasting.
What about water fasting 1 day a week or something like that?
Well, essentially, that's what you're doing every night, 16 hours of fasting every night. One of the problems is the first few days of fasting are the most expensive in terms of protein utilization and other aspects, and where most of the importance comes in for being in a restful and controlled state. So if people are doing 1 day a week fasting, say once a week for a year, that's not like 50 days of fasting. It's going to be more depleting, less beneficial. So what would be better to do is do intermittent fasting, and then once in a while, if necessary, in a controlled setting, do long-term water fasting. Or just live so healthily you don't need to do fasting because you won't be accumulating excesses faster than you eliminate them.
Yeah, at some point your body can keep up with the daily pollution from the outside, right?
Yeah.
If it's clean enough.
Well, you should be getting healthier a little faster than you're getting older and sicker. That's called rejuvenation. If you're getting fatter and sicker faster than you're aging, then that's called aging.
Yeah, what do you think normal aging would look like?
Well, we know that people that adopt a health-promoting diet, in other words, don't smoke, don't drink, and don't use inappropriate medications or highly processed foods, live on average substantially longer. There's studies with Adventist priests and others that show that people live longer. But I'm more concerned not about just living longer, but more importantly, living better. Many people spend the last decade or two of their life unable to talk or move, sitting in some nursing home bed, waiting for somebody to come and change their diaper because they've had this stroke or heart attack. It's delaying or avoiding debilitation that I think is the biggest appeal of this approach, because we can dramatically reduce the likelihood of debility by adopting health-promoting habits. And I see these patients, they're in their 80s, they're in their 90s, they're still sharp as tacks and living healthfully because they've adopted these habits. In fact, I just saw a gentleman on a 30-year follow-up. So I saw him 30 years ago when he was 55 with cardiovascular disease, hypertension, on meds, overweight, and he made the diet and lifestyle changes. Now we'll fast forward 30 years later. He comes in the office. I haven't seen him in 14 years. And I asked him why he was there. He said he was there for a checkup. He thought it was time. So I examined him. He's doing fine. He tells me that he adopted this diet and that all of the people that he worked with are dead. All of his friends are dead. He's still painting. He was a painter back then. He's still a painter now. He said even his son died. He had a son who died, cardiovascular disease, because he wasn't doing the program. So here he is now 30 years later. He tells me that when I saw him originally, he asked me if he had to do the diet for the rest of his life. And that was the first patient I told, no, we don't have to do it forever. We'll just do it for 50 years. We'll set just a 50-year, and after that you can do whatever you want.
So pretty soon you've got to take that back and tell him to revise it, right?
Now he's at 30 years. He's 85. He said that he was going to follow the program for 20 more years, like he agreed to originally, to honor his commitment. But he said after that he couldn't make any promises.
Pretty suspicious.
He made another appointment in 14 years. He's going to be 99 years old. Yeah. He told me, though, if anything comes up, he'll let me know.
Maybe you can have another appointment to review the plans for the next half century or something.
At the time, I was thinking I should have said 60 years, but I thought, 50 years is so long. I don't want to make it seem like it's forever.
It's at least maybe the next group of patients you can do 60 or 70.
Yeah, no, now I'm old, though, so it's okay.
Oh, that's right.
Years,
I forgot.
I won't be there to follow up, so... Yeah. My grandson calls me the AO. He's 12 years old now. He says I'm the AO, and I found that AO stands for Ancient One. Yeah,
I understand. But you're really in your first century still, I think, right? So you're just getting going.
I'm 59, so I'm starting the second half here for sure.
You just have to start fasting 4 out of 5 days and make sure you don't.
Yeah, I don't know if it works that way. I do fasting every year. I hate fasting, but I do it every year because it is helpful and I do find it beneficial. But I don't like it because you can't play basketball, and I'm afraid if I lose even a little bit, I'll lose distance between me and Doug. So
that's right. There's some serious issues to consider.
Yeah.
What about? Do you remember a book by Alexis Carrel called Man the Unknown? Have you heard of that? Okay, in that book, he did some really unusual experiments, and one of them, he took the heart of a chicken, which I'm sure was really bad for the chicken, but, he was just doing that, and he wanted to see how soon it really has to age and die, because I think chickens have a lifespan like 3 to 4 years. And he put it in a nutrient solution. I don't know exactly what the composition was, and he had it cleaned, the solution cleaned every day. And he kept it alive for like 20-some years. And the only reason that it died was because the lab assistant forgot to clean the solution, and then the heart died. But it brings up some interesting questions. And one of them is, if you do end up finding whatever is the ideal protocol for a person to live by, what do they die of?
Well, they're going to die eventually of systems failure. You want to remember, there's been 109 billion humans, modern humans, born on the planet. Mm-hmm. There are about 7.5 billion alive today. There have been only 5 individuals that have lived past 117. And that's every kind of different diet configuration and strategy you can imagine. So the odds of living beyond 117 currently are about 1 in 20 billion. The odds are much better. You're going to live somewhat less than 117. Mm-hmm. So eventually, there's lots of theories of aging, but materials can accumulate in the cells. There may be inherent limitations to how many times cells can divide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever the fact is, we have a pretty big database that suggests that probably 117 is the upper limits of how long we're going to live. Now the question is, how can we reduce the amount of debility? How can we live fully till we die? And I think we're on to something there with this approach, because I think in watching my patients, particularly now as they're getting in several decades of doing this, the tendency is for them, those that are compliant, to live until they die. And oftentimes in immediate proximity to their death. For example, my oldest patient was a gentleman who ultimately passed away at 107 and 10 months. Mm-hmm. And the only debility he had was the hour before he went to sleep on the night he passed away. He wasn't feeling very good, went to bed early, never woke. And I think that's what we call a good death. So we want a good life.
That's a clue of what could become normal. Yeah.
I think that it's very likely that people that live this way will find that, yes, they will die, and they will die probably before they reach 117, but that they're likely to be able to live very much towards till they reach their genetic potential.
Did you hear about Norman Walker, who wrote all the juicing books? I think he lived to about 117 from what I read.
Well, there's a lot of stories about that. I think you'll find if you actually track it down, he didn't do quite that well. But he did live a long age. He lived well until he eventually passed away. I think one of the stories is he went out surfing in his late years. But in any case, I don't think he quite made it. He wasn't one of the 5 people on the planet that's been well documented to live to be 117.
Okay.
But he did live till advanced age, apparently, and maintain a high degree of fitness.
Yeah, he stayed in pretty good shape. What about, you mentioned that it would be good to cut caloric intake for most people and lose a little bit of weight. But a question that comes up a lot is, what's the contrast between weight loss and fat loss?
Well, obviously, what we're really talking about is maintaining optimum weight and optimum percent, body fat. Excess fat on the body may not be desirable. Absolute weight is a little deceptive because, if you work out real hard, you may have higher muscle mass and
you get heavier, right?
BMI may be higher. So, there's some debate about that. What I can tell you is this: if you get people eating an exclusively whole plant food diet that's free of sugar, oil, and salt, and they're getting moderate exercise and adequate sleep, pretty much the weight takes care of itself, and they'll usually get within a few pounds of their optimum weight without even thinking about it.
Do you notice a pattern in what is kind of an optimum fat percentage for males and females?
Well, I think there's some debate about that. I'm not prepared to give you a definitive because there's still discussion in the literature. But clearly, men maintain naturally a lower percent body fat than women. There's debates about different ranges and if is thinner better, and how much thinner is how much better. One thing I can tell you, most women can tell you within like about an ounce of what they think their optimum weight is, and they're usually pretty right. Most men aren't quite as concerned about it, but the bottom line is lean and mean is probably better than overweight and not fit.
Yeah, I suspect some of the really old people that you mentioned were probably not super heavy.
Right. There's also downside, with women, particularly if their percent body fat's too low, then they'll come in ovulatory, and women are designed by nature to store a little bit of higher percent body fat in order to survive that biological vulnerability called pregnancy. So,
exactly.
I think it's a better decision determined individually with a patient when you look into account everything, from their age, their fitness, their percent body fat, even their physiognomy. Some people are very, much more mesomorphic, some are more ectomorphic, and so those numbers are going to vary a little bit.
What are the main things that people have trouble with compliance? I mean, I think about things like Diet Coke and things that they're really attached to, and that would be connected to ideas that you talked about in the pleasure trap too, I'm sure.
Well, it's really the combination of oil, salt, and sugar, SOS. They put in all kinds of different formats. Some foods are particularly enhanced, like chocolate, because they'll put there's caffeine as well as the sugar, oil, and salt. And people go after that aggressively. Alcohol is a big problem. Basically, the entire dietary spectrum, everything except whole plant foods, there's SOS free. Any of them have the potential for addictive interactions.
Yeah, like diet soft drinks don't have any of the SOS in them.
Diet soft drinks don't, but they have the chemicals. And unfortunately, if you look at the literature on diet sodas, they don't help with weight loss. In fact, they're counterproductive. People drinking more diet soda end up getting even fatter because you stimulate that mechanism in the brain without satiating it. So it results in actually increasing total caloric consumption, even though, intuitively it seems like it would be helpful. It's not.
Yeah, especially since the name is diet, it must be,
It must be, yeah. Right. Well, the whole world's designed to give people what they want, not what they need. So if you want to make money, you tell people what they want to hear.
Is MSG something similar to?
Well, in some ways it's even worse. It's a salt that has other, health compromising factors, so we don't use any monosodium glutamate in any circumstance. Right.
Well, you're talking about totally unprocessed food, right?
Yeah, it's a real problem because most of the food people eat now, they're hiring other people to make for them, whether it's in a package at a restaurant.
Right.
They're not actually doing the shopping and chopping necessary to get healthy foods. And so people obviously are resistant and reluctant to put any kind of effort into doing anything because if you were as fat and sick and as exhausted as they are, you wouldn't want to do it either.
Yeah, exactly. And what about the fact that even if you buy a carrot and it's a plant-based carrot and it's still whole and everything, it could be grown with a lot of pesticide?
Yeah, well, that's why we encourage people to buy organically grown fruits and vegetables whenever possible. In fact, you know who the biggest supplier of organic produce in the United States is?
No.
Costco.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Number 2 is Walmart.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So, and the reason is, people have made their opinions known. They would rather buy organically grown produce.
Yeah.
And so if you buy organically grown produce, you have less exposure to pesticides, less exposure, and that's probably desirable. You can also do something really radical like we do and grow a garden.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how much food you can grow in a relatively small space if you're fortunate enough to live in a place like California like we do.
Yes, exactly.
So, I think we have to decentralize a little bit and get back to growing more food locally and,
Right.
getting back to more whole foods. It's cheaper, it's better, it supports the environment, and it supports our health.
It's really good for the patients to be outside growing gardens, too.
Yeah. Little sun exposure, a little exercise, not a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, sun exposure is really important for you because you're warned that it's going to kill you. Right?
Well, that's the one thing in medicine that they'll listen to. They say, don't smoke, they smoke. Don't drink, they drink. Don't eat meat, they eat meat. Don't go out in the sun. Oh, okay, that'll do.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. So I think I have the feeling that the sun is supplying a lot more than what's called vitamin D. But
vitamin D is one of the hormones associated with sun exposure to the skin, but I think you're probably right. There's probably a lot of benefit to getting appropriate sun exposure. Obviously, if you don't want to burn, burning increases risk for skin cancer and other things. But, getting outside, getting some exercise, getting some fresh air, getting some sunshine, just maybe the natural hygienists were onto something when they advocated that for all people.
Yeah, I think so for sure. So if somebody's just starting to think about maybe that there's a connection between toxicity and health and body mass index and health and things like that, what are the first easy ways to start? I guess it would be toward the preparation that you recommend for people before they come visit you anyway, right? How do they start on that?
What I would do truly is go to our website at healthpromoting.com and go on the Learning Channel and read some of the articles, watch some of the videos, get yourself exposed to the basic concepts, see if it makes sense to you. If you really want a detailed explanation, read our book, The Pleasure Trap. It's a disturbing book. It will not tell you what you want to hear, but it does tell you what you need to know in order to get and stay healthy.
Right.
And then try it. We have a couple vegan SOS-free cookbooks out there called the Health Promoting Cookbook and the Bravo Cookbook. These are recipes simple enough to make, even I can make them, and yet they don't use any sugar, oil, salt, no glutinous grains, nothing that would be antagonistic, and certainly no animal food. Try some recipes. Find out, this stuff's not that hard to make. It tastes really good. It's cost-effective. It's efficient. And then see how you feel, because it doesn't take long. Most people, even within a couple of weeks, are noticing profound changes. They're losing weight. Their skin's clearing up. Their breathing is better. Their joint pain is less. The blood pressure's coming down. Their blood sugars are starting to normalize. And so, then when you start to get some success, you may decide to carry it further. If it's something that you just need to do on your own long enough, that's fine. If you need a little bit of help, you can contact us. For your readers or listeners, if they're interested, we offer, I think, a rather novel thing, which is if they go onto our website at healthpromoting.com and complete the registration forms, which gets me their medical history, we offer a free phone conversation. They can call. I'll talk to them about what they can do that they're not doing, try to help them understand what their options are. It doesn't cost them anything. Happy to do that. And so that's also a way of maybe, getting a feel of what can they do that they're not doing on their own. If fasting's appropriate or necessary, I can certainly talk to them about if they're a candidate and what would be involved in making something like that happen. So, there's lots of resources now available in terms of books and videos and lectures and the websites now are very, very useful. And now they have access to get some input on the phone as well.
Is that with you or possibly
it is with me?
It's with you. And how long do you usually talk to people on those calls?
Well, it varies. Some people need a few minutes, some people need more time. If a person has very detailed medical management issues, then we can set them up with one of the medical doctors that we have that does phone consultative services, that kind of thing. Okay. But at least my role is to help them understand, are they candidates for the kind of stuff we do? And if so, who would be a good match for them, or what direction do we need to point them in?
Exactly.
Sometimes we have doctors that we work with remotely that might be in their area that might be a better resource than the person we're working with now if they're frustrated. So we'll make those referrals. It's basically just to give a person an orientation. Obviously, there's some limits to how many personal medical issues you can solve on the phone, in a brief conversation. But it's surprising how often even basic advice is sufficient to help people move in the direction of resolving their problems.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, some of the problems that could be resolved or at least greatly improved with the fasting protocol, you mentioned that people's skin clears up. And Is that because the skin is trying to take over for overloaded elimination organs in the body, or
Well, the skin
what's your
kind of
thought?
reflects internal health, and it is thought to be a secondary source of detoxification. But I think mostly it's the dietary changes correct a lot of the hormonal imbalances that are associated with conditions like hives and eczema and acne. And so when you're correcting the internal health, it's reflected in the skin.
Right. And so what about there's a lot of important issues. One of them that's going on right now, especially in California, is that they're saying that all the kids need to be injected with the latest vaccines. What do you think about is going on with that?
Well, I think it's a really dangerous thing when you start allowing government officials to determine what's in the best health interest of you and your child. You and your doctor are in a much better position to make an evaluation for you and your child what is not in the best health interest of that child. Turning that over to government authorities, I think, is a very dangerous precedent, because although well-intentioned, they can often be misguided, and many times some of the things that are done create more problems than they solve. So in general, I think that is I'm completely against the idea of delegating that responsibility to some government bureaucrat. Second of all, when you do evaluate the risk-reward ratio of immunization, it's not quite as clean as it's sometimes suggested, that it's all good and no bad. There's risk and benefit associated with any medical procedure. Immunization is no exception. Now, they'll argue that they've made it somewhat less bad because they've removed thimerosal and mercury, for example, from most immunizations. Not all, but most immunizations. And that was one of the big arguments, that all this excess mercury exposure that was a preservative in immunization was a problem. Even if you don't want to argue, like even if you fully accept the whole premise that immunization is safe and effective, some of the carrier agents that are used to deliver the immunizations were highly detrimental because they improved profit efficiency, because they're basically preservatives that allowed for multi-injector use, that kind of thing. So lots of arguments to be made around this issue of immunization. Also, that you may want to make an argument for certain immunizations but not others, for example, in childhood. That's all eliminated when you start passing laws that mandate everybody, regardless of their health history, desires, or belief, have to undergo whatever it is the latest fad of medical treatment recommendation is. Don't forget, it wasn't too long ago that they were telling all women that they needed to have estrogen replacement therapy to help their hearts. It turns out, of course, that was complete fraud. It's not reducing cardiovascular disease, all increased risk for breast cancer and other problems. So it's not like there's a perfect track record in terms of safety and efficiency when it comes to medical procedures. So I would say, what you want to do is have an informed decision with your physician about each and every medical treatment that you're considering submitting to, and that certainly is not, immunization is not an exception to that rule.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. And also, you mentioned removing the mercury. That a lot of the ones that have had the mercury taken out have been totally loaded up with aluminum and a lot of other stuff too. So it's an interesting subject. And a lot of the doctors I've talked to actually don't know what they're injecting into the people, which is pretty shocking if you're not familiar with how that works. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to ask you is that with regard to your center, you let various kinds of doctors and health professionals come there and learn by participating in what you're doing.
Yes, we have an active internship and residency training program. We have about 30 doctors a year currently that rotate through. They do a minimum of 1 month, some do 3 months, some do 1 year training periods. They come in, they do rounds, they participate in our weekly grand rounds meetings, they involved in the research that we're doing. And so it's a chance for a doctor to learn how to do something really worthwhile with their life and help sick people get well for a change. So the doctors that come oftentimes find they learn a tremendous amount. Some of them come as medical students as part of their training. Some of them come, they're chiropractors, naturopaths. We have some nurse practitioners that come that have already been in practice for a while. Some are coming end of career because they're tired of what they're doing. They want to do something different. And generally, they're very helpful. They bring in all kinds of interesting enthusiasm and experience. And it's one of the missions of the True North Health Foundation to help train doctors to be more familiar with this. Some of them go on and have opened up facilities to do fasting supervision and begin to incorporate these principles in their practice. Other of them utilize us as a referral source, and they'll send appropriately screened patients to us for care. And either way, that's great. Our goal is to help get this information disseminated broader. And the True North Health Foundation's mission is both education, both of doctors and the public, as well as doing the original research.
Okay. And it sounds like in addition to the details of how to do the fasting correctly, you're introducing them, I guess, by immersion to the idea of non-symptomatic approaches to health.
You know, one of the biggest things we do is those doctors come with us and they live with us and they eat with us, which means for a month they're eating a vegan SOS-free diet. They're not drinking, smoking, using coffee, animal foods. They're not having sugar, oil, or salt. And they go through an epiphany experience. Oftentimes they recover their health. And as a consequence, they start to realize, oh, the food's a big deal. What you put in your mouth makes a big difference. And once they see the patients getting well, it really can change their practice entirely. And so I think a lot of what we're offering doctors isn't just the training and the exposure, but it's also the experience of actually, for sometimes the first time in their life, living healthfully.
What it feels like, in other words.
Absolutely. That has a profound effect on people when they experience it themselves.
So, this is a hard question to answer just in general, but I've noticed here in Arizona where I am, there's a naturopathic college. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
I am. I teach a class for them. I do a grand rounds there once a year.
They need to somehow get the idea of non-symptomatic approach to health, and I've talked to many of them over there, and they're still. I just get, this is not to be condemning them at all. I'm just trying to see how to get this through to people that they're using an herb like as if it were a drug. And they're not
this
idea.
green allopathy, though, fits the model that the patients coming in often demand. Patients are not wanting to have you tell them, well, you're fat and sick and because you eat wrong and you have to eat differently. They want something to take or do that doesn't require them to get out of the pleasure trap, but alleviates their symptoms, much like they do when they go to medical doctors. So I have to say, though, the doctors that we have from the school in Arizona that come to the True North Health Center and learn what's called Nature Cure, first level therapeutic order intervention, do understand better. And so it's just, I think it's good for them to come and get doctors trained on how to use Nature Cure effectively, and that's what we're trying to do at the True North Health Center.
So they just need the experience, basically.
Absolutely. Once you see it, it's very hard to deny it.
Are you getting to teach anything about the fasting part with the course that you're doing for them?
Yeah, well, I teach at what's called a grand rounds. I go in and I do a one-day presentation on fasting and the pleasure trap, and it goes to the whole student population. So they get a little bit of exposure now, and they do have courses on Nature Cure, and so they're trying to reinvigorate naturopathy and naturopathic medicine. It kind of got lost there for a while, in my opinion.
So you think it's turning around and going back in a good direction from what
I think it's very slowly turning around, but I think as people like us publish more data showing that what works is Nature Cure, I think they'll become more and more interested in it.
Okay, so I'm assuming that you're doing this class electronically, so you don't have to go back and forth.
No, I fly around to the different schools once each year.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Like besides SCNM, you go to other naturopath schools?
Go to all the naturopathic colleges on the West Coast. So the two best years, San Diego and in Seattle. I do in UNM in Portland. I do the Southwest College in Arizona. And I'm actually doing more of the schools now. As the schools, I'm starting to get invitations from the other schools. So I'll be going to Illinois here this summer and, in Florida. So there'll be... I'm going to National University in March. A lot of them are now becoming interested because fasting is kind of having a
resurgence.
Resurgence, excuse me. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. What about the chiropractic colleges?
I teach at Western States Chiropractic College, and I'm on the faculty at a number of the schools, and we have students that come for 3 months. They can spend their last 3 months of school at our clinic instead of in the school clinic. And so that gives them a chance to have, really intense experience and learn how to use this type of approach.
Wow, that's great. So it's really upgrading all the schools that you're doing this with. They're getting a little bit of experience of, something other than just symptomatic. And I know that they can't do that with all their patients because they've got hundreds or thousands of people coming off the street into the school-based clinic, and they just say, well, I have a headache today. I need this fixed so I can go back to work, or something like that.
Well, and that, like I say, it's difficult for these doctors to make a living giving people the truth, which is focus on diet and sleep and exercise. That people are paying for a diagnosis and a prescription of a pill, potion, powder, or treatment. So
they're actually allowed to prescribe drugs in Arizona.
Oh yeah, well, their big excitement was when marijuana became legal. They're just all it's hither over that, which is, I think, a serious mistake. But
Yeah, I agree with you completely. But in Arizona, they're allowed to prescribe all the medical drugs too.
Sure. Well, like I said, green allopathy.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So I have noticed that chiropractors in general seem to be more open-minded than a lot of kinds of doctors, and they've gotten into dietary changes and other things like that. But I suspect that.
Yeah, I
Go
think
ahead.
diet's always been an important part of chiropractic training, the role that diet and lifestyle play, since D.D. Palmer originally.
Mhm.
So I think the chiropractors do tend to be open, but also they make their living providing, manipulative therapy services. And so, they're not paid more because they take a lot of time to talk to people about diet and lifestyle. They're paid to treat
Yeah.
people with manipulation. And so there's a lot of pressure to see lots of people in order to generate professional incomes.
Yeah. I mean, some of the chiropractors have 10 rooms with tables in each one, and they jump in and out of each one.
Yeah.
But you guys do use some aspect of chiropractic too at True North.
Yes, we have 4 excellent chiropractors on the staff. We have one gentleman who's particularly interested in sports medicine, one person who does a lot of, one woman that does a lot of body use training, fitness training, posture, all that type of stuff, and a couple general chiropractors that do diversified manipulation, physical therapy. And so when there's a mechanical musculoskeletal related problem, we certainly address those, I think, professionally and effectively. We also have a naturopathic doctor who does acupuncture and provides, good nutritional medicine advice. And we have 5 medical doctors that are all conventionally trained but have adopted this style approach. And the doctors we have, really incredibly intelligent, wonderful guys. Everybody loves our medical staff. We also have medical assistants. We have nutritional trainers. We have people that teach yoga, body use, fitness training. We've got a chef who's wonderful and probably the best vegan SOS-free chef in the world, along with a sous chef that has good experience and his staff. And the rest of the crew. There's over 50 people that work at the True North Health Center, and we've got that's probably one of the strongest things we've got is, highly motivated, excellent employees that work really hard at giving people a safe and effective experience.
Yeah, it sounds like a super support system. You mentioned the yoga. How do you think yoga fits into all this?
Well, we teach a modified version of yoga that's appropriate for fasting patients, and then a little more vigorous version of yoga for stretching, strengthening, and flexibility. Whatever you call it, whether it's yoga, whether it's any of the various fitness training modalities that we use, basically it's the idea that people have to have flexibility, they have to have strength, they have to develop endurance. In a natural setting, you would do it just getting enough to eat and not getting eaten. In the modern world where you could sit on your butt and never move and still get enough to eat, we have to consciously do it by getting people moving, and we try to teach people to use their bodies properly.
Right, and if they're not carrying all this fat around that you talked about, they should become more flexible as that gets better.
Certainly the weight loss is helpful, but more importantly even than the weight is the inflammation. Reducing inflammation is a profound epiphany experience for patients that have been in chronic pain, and fasting just does a fabulous job of reducing inflammation.
Right, I would think that starts really helping a lot in the first few days.
Yeah, it doesn't take long before many patients start to get significant improvements.
What about resistance exercise?
Yeah, we do resistance exercises here, and we train people to use those. We don't do a lot of that while they're fasting,
right?
But both on how to use your body for resistance, as well as we use some weight training and various types of machines and things that we apply depending on the patient and what the goal is. Most of the resistance training you can use your body itself. And we do things like tubing and other stuff that is gentle.
What they used to call calisthenics was like sit-ups and push-ups, but nowadays it's really sophisticated.
Yeah.
So okay, I would think in the last few days of the refeeding cycle, you're probably teaching people a lot of stuff that they can do when they.
We're teaching them all the way through, including fasting. We just don't let them be too vigorous while they're fasting.
Okay.
So like we have a chair yoga class that people can do while they're actually fasting, and then they do the more vigorous stuff as they come off the fast. And some of our people are here for a while. Some people are here a week or two, but some people are here a month or two. Some people are here as long as a year.
Wow,
so depending on the patient and their condition. Okay. Well, when you think about it, some people, instead of going into, say, senior housing or something, they might come here because it's a lot cheaper. They save a lot of money. Plus, they actually get well, and then they go home instead of spend the rest of their lives in some nursing home bed.
Wow. I have often thought that a lot of the patients, maybe even a majority that are in some kind of a nursing home or place where they're supposed to die could actually go back to a normal life and get better.
Oh, you'd be surprised at how forgiving the body is if you'd be willing to control what you put in the mouth of the people that are there.
Yeah, yeah.
But they also have to want to do it. A lot of people get older, they don't want to change their diet. They don't want to have to give up their addictions any more than younger people do.
Yeah, so the psychology is a big issue, how much you can motivate people, right?
It's huge. Yeah, it's a huge problem.
You have psychologists on staff there?
The very smartest person I've ever met happens to be a clinical psychologist on the staff here, and that's Doug Lyle. He's a behavioral cognitive therapist. He's really brilliant. Now, don't tell anybody I ever said that. I'll deny it if anybody says it, because I always tell them it's all a crock of crap. But the truth is, he's tremendously helpful to people, because he helps them change the way they view themselves and the world around them. And sometimes that's all it takes to give a person a different perspective. So I really do respect the role that appropriate psychotherapy can play in helping people deal with their issues. But I just don't want Dr. Lyle to know that I approve of it, because then his head might get big or something.
Yeah, exactly. And he might get more motivated in the basketball. Or
I know. Or you couldn't have that.
But can I tell people who would never talk to him? Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine, as long as they don't talk to him.
Okay.
Actually, he has a website. It's at www.esteemdynamics.com. And he has a lot of
ESTEEM Dynamics.com.
And he actually he does a lot of remote consultation. They can access him on the internet. He has a good website, explains his thinking. He's really a huge resource for us. He lectures every week to all of our patients as part of our program, and he's also available individually for psychotherapy.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, because I would think if you could do things like eliminate constant fear and worry and stuff like that, you'd get a lot better compliance.
Yeah, it turns out you're probably right.
So, pretty interesting. What about teaching people about sleep patterns, and how much do you notice that that's an issue?
Yeah, it's a huge issue. Sleep is one of the most important activities. Disrupted sleep disrupts the hormones that happen during non-REM deep sleep. So if you don't get enough deep sleep, you don't heal. And so when people are eating right before they go to bed, when they have animals waking them up at night or something, when they have disturbance or sleep deprivation, it compromises their healing abilities. So we always encourage people. We recommend a book called Power of Sleep by Maas, M-A-A-S.
Okay.
And it talks about all the important sleep hygiene habits. People can read that book. And Dr. Lyle also trains people in terms of how to overcome the disturbances sometimes associated with sleep. He realizes this is a critically important part of helping people not just with their physical health, but also their psychological health.
Okay, yeah, you mentioned eating right before they go to sleep. It seems like when you get right down to it, the body's kind of a very slow-speed gravity digestion machine.
Yeah, and when you think about it, that's true.
It takes a while for things to be... digestion is mostly just dissolving an acid, really, a weak acid. So it's not quick, and I wonder how long, ideally, do you encourage people to not eat before they lie down?
People not to eat. Here at the center, we feed people at 5 o'clock, and we want them to stop eating by 6 so that they can, and they're waking up around 7, so they have at least 13 hours. Okay. And we don't serve breakfast till 8:30, so we're getting 14 hours every day of fasting, even in the people that are feeding.
Neat. Okay. And then, you already talked about Doug's work, but I would think that you somewhere in there you're teaching people to relax a little bit and not to have as much of a combative attitude toward other people in their relationships and stuff like that.
Well, I tell people that stress is like Christmas. It's better to give than receive, so try to be generous.
Well, that's pretty neat. So,
yeah, no, seriously, how you deal with stress is the issue. You're not going to eliminate stress, but you can learn to cope with it and deal with it. And that's where I think behavioral cognitive therapy is so effective. For example, Dr. Lyle uses an example. If you were in an elevator and somebody was poking you in the back with a sharp stick, you might get angry or upset.
Okay.
But as you turn and you notice the person that's poking you is a blind person with a cane, and they're just trying to find their, where they are in the elevator. Wow. You still don't want to get poked, and you'll step out of the way, but you wouldn't be angry at them because you'd realize they can't help it. They're doing the best they can within their limitations. Yeah. Well, cognitive therapy helps people understand that sometimes people that are pissing you off can't help it. And so the strategy is, what can you do to manipulate their behavior, avoid their behavior, or deal with it in a way that you don't have to be angry? So it's not that you're denying that the behavior is there, but you may be able to change how you cope or adjust to it. And so one of the things that he's training people to do is to look at their environment, change the things they can, and figure out how to deal with the things that they can't completely eliminate. And so that now you can at least get out of the very biologically expensive anger mode and get into more of an understanding mode, which still doesn't mean you don't have to avoid the sources of stress, but at least now you're in a position to make better actions. But if you don't understand, who it is that's poking you in the back and why they're doing it, it can be a very difficult thing to adjust to. And the same thing's true. A lot of people are engaging behaviors that are making you upset, and you don't understand what it is that's motivating their behavior. Dr. Lyle or therapists like him can help you understand what it is that's driving their behavior, and then you're in a better position to avoid it or change it.
It's interesting that you use the analogy of the blind person, because in a way, most of the people who are doing dumb things that are stressful are blind to one degree or another.
Yeah, you picked up on that. It wasn't a complete accident.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that in what you just explained is that the stress isn't really the poking, it's your reaction to it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's a big part of it, is how you respond to it. The same stress can elicit different kinds of responses depending on your magnitude of understanding.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so basically it's really simple. Oh, I know what I forgot to ask you. A lot of people have questioned whether fasting could ever affect things, not with the soft tissue, but with bones and joints. I mean, I'm sure you've had a lot of experience with that. So
I have to say there's a huge effect on joints because of inflammation. I mean, it's remarkable. As far as bone health, I can't think of good examples where primary bone lesions or whatever respond to fasting.
Right. But arthritis is like epidemic, and so I'm talking really about joints mostly.
Well, autoimmune diseases like osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis are more profoundly affected by fasting than anything else I know.
Wow.
It's huge. I mean, it's almost universal, and there's almost all people with these inflammatory joint will get some level of improvement. Sometimes it's a miracle, and sometimes it's significant improvement. And you can't always tell who's going to be who, in advance, but it's a consistent response. In fact, it's one of the more common things people describe as their constant joint ache and tightness. This tends to be. We joke amongst the chiropractors at the True North Health Center that you better treat these people like immediately when they arrive, because if you let them do a fast, by the time they're done, there's nothing left to treat.
I know it's going to ruin the whole business. Huh?
So it just, fortunately for us, we can live with that, so it's okay.
Well, you've got quite a few more people that haven't fasted yet.
Yeah, there's still a few people out there.
So if they can't move their joints, it doesn't mean that they can't get any better.
Yeah, now obviously there are some degrees of fusion and stuff that are not likely reversible, but for most of the people that are having, it's worse when they get up in the morning, it's worse after they walk, whatever it is, those kinds of functional problems where the level of pain changes, that's a very good sign that they're likely to be able to get improvement. And also, let's face it, if you take a lot of our patients are losing 50 pounds, 100 pounds, it makes a lot less pressure on the joints. If you go into a store and pick up a grocery store, pick up a big dog food bag, chuck it over your shoulders, carry that 50 pounds around while you're shopping.
Yeah, like every day, all day. Right.
Yeah, it starts to take a toll, just the mechanical factor. So you take off 50, 100 pounds, oh my gosh, all of a sudden it's not quite so burdensome.
Yeah, so that means fasting is helping your feet and your legs and everything because of that.
But it happens even quicker because of the reduction in inflammation. If you measure acute phase-reactive proteins like CRP or cerebrate, they go down tremendously in fasting and very predictably. And that is an objective measure of inflammation. So we're pretty sure we're onto something when it comes to inflammation.
I've heard even more unusual than the joint, great improvement there. I've heard fasting in some cases with the right kind of food afterwards actually helping nerve damage.
I haven't seen as much direct effect from fasting and neuropathy, for example. Sometimes we do see neuropathy improve, but I think it's because the swelling goes down. There's less nerve pressure. I don't know that fasting directly affects nerve damage. So, I mean, it would be nice if we could find some evidence of that, but I just don't have anything I can point to that says that that's true.
Have you noticed that peripheral neuropathy is really getting common among people, especially over a certain age now?
Well, that's because you have, epidemic diabetes, and it's happening younger.
It's the same sort of thing.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge.
Right. In fact, that brings up another thing is that, and I'm trying to talk fast because, I want to use the rest of our little bit of time here. Kids are way sicker, partly because of vaccines, I'm sure, but other processed food and everything too. And they're walking around with inhalers, and they're getting all kinds of neurological problems and autism and stuff like that. And I've heard that it's harder for really young kids to fast. So what do you do if that's the case?
Look, 25% of the calories of teenagers in some studies come from the sugar and soda pop alone. Mm-hmm. Kids are getting fatter and sicker by the day. Diabetes is increasing epidemically because we're poisoning the children. That's really what it comes down to. And of course, they have more asthma and all the rest of it. Right. Typically, though, kids are pretty resilient. If you put them on a healthy diet, they get well. They recover.
So they might just need get rid of the bad food, and you might not even have to fast for a little.
We try to avoid fasting in children if possible. It has all kinds of legal complications. You have to have both parents on board. You got to worry about the grandparents. People call child services because it's just not accepted yet. Yeah. But the fact is, there are some kids that we do use fasting with. It's not something we want to do, but when necessary, it's a consideration. But fortunately, fasts tend to be relatively brief in children, and they definitely need to be done under supervision because dehydration is a big issue, even bigger issue in kids than adults. So it really does need to be done in a professionally supervised setting. And hopefully, if we can get the diet right, we can avoid the need to have to do the fasting.
Right. Yeah, I would think just getting rid of the non-organic processed food would be incredible.
Well, getting rid of the sugar, the oil, the salt, and all the dead decaying flesh and coagulated cow pus, that would be a good step in the right direction. Yeah,
don't you have a fancier name for that, and like the French restaurants or something? Sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, probably the single biggest compromised food that people eat, in my opinion, is dairy products. Mm-hmm. So if there's number one on the list of things to get out of your kids, it's the milk, cheese, the yogurt, the chocolate, all the foods that contain the milk products. I see more changes in people's health short term just getting rid of dairy products than any other single food factor.
Yeah, well, I think what they call dairy products are probably not even dairy products anymore. They're something that comes out of these cows that are treated in ways that can't even be imagined. I mean, instead of their usual 25-year lifespan, they live to be 3, and they're full of chemicals, and it's just incredible. I mean, I don't know what you'd call it, but it's something that wouldn't be safe to consume.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess if you had to give somebody encouragement with all the psychological issues and stuff that are against trying to do anything healthy, some of which you described, and they're just starting to have things bother them in their body, and they're wanting to go to the doctor, which is the beginning of the cycle of getting into drug addiction on the medical level. Mm-hmm. What can you tell them to consider doing instead? I mean, because once they get to the doctor, there's so much fear that if you don't take this drug forever, you're going to, do something terrible to yourself.
Well, first I'd say try to find a doctor that's not an idiot. If you can find a doctor that's an integrative medicine doctor that's thinking more about health and health promotion, a naturopathic physician, a chiropractor, an alternative medicine person, a medical doctor that's been trained in alternative medicine, you may have a better chance of at least getting some decent advice. That's number one. Number two, get yourself educated so you understand what's going on so that you know what questions to ask. And that's why reading books like The Pleasure Trap can be really helpful. Because then you go in armed with knowledge and you can evaluate whether the person that's giving you advice is coming from the perspective that you're interested in. And then be frank and honest with the doctor that you're not necessarily looking for another pill, potion, or powder. You're looking to understand the cause of the problem. You don't want to deal with the leading cause of death. You want to deal with the actual cause of death and disability.
Right, exactly. And when you say a doctor that's not an idiot, you're not really talking about IQ, I don't think.
No, most doctors are really bright and often really well-intentioned, but they're often misguided. But that's why the doctors that have opened their minds up to the whole fields of alternative integrative medicine, I wouldn't say I agree with everything they do, but they tend to be a little bit more open-minded. And so if you can find one of those that you can resonate with, I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, some of the medical doctors that have been trained exclusively with drugs and invasive procedures and everything have come through that with common sense intact and have become really brilliant, great healers. And some of them that have been on our show recently have talked about that there could be something much better being done with people, even at the later stages of their life when they end up essentially being drugged to death in hospice and places
maybe
like
especially at the later
right.
times in life. But again, it only works in people that are willing to make the diet and lifestyle changes, in my experience. You can't do it for them. And just because you love somebody, that doesn't mean they're going to do it. It has to come from inside themselves. No,
that's true. And if they're in a lot of pain and on a lot of drugs, it's not as easy to have a clear conversation.
Yeah.
But they were talking about the general procedure in the specialized nursing hospitals that are doing what they're calling palliative care. And
I got no tree. All the care that's being offered essentially is palliative care when you think about it. There's very few conditions where curative care is actually possible.
So palliative is the same as symptomatic, is what you're saying?
Well, of course, yeah. Providing relief. It's just they stop pretending that they're trying to cure it. They start acknowledging that all they're doing is trying to manage it.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that's the official language that you're supposed to use.
And I don't have any problem with palliative care in the sense that there are conditions that sometimes are not easy to reverse, and you have to keep people as comfortable as possible, and that's where medicine can do an effective job, and that's what hospice care is all about. Mm-hmm. The only problem is there's a lot of problems that people are thinking nothing can be done and everything can be done, but the reason they think nothing can be done is they don't understand the causes of the problem are often diet and lifestyle related.
Right.
For example, you have high blood pressure, they will tell you will be on drugs the rest of your life.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, our data shows that's not true.
And I think Shelton himself worked with some older people too, with not just middle-aged and young people, right?
Sure. He had the advantage, though, that his population wasn't third-generation junk fooders. It was 50 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, I think the main thing is people need to not be discouraged no matter what's going on and realize that nature is a really powerful healer and it just needs to be supported. And I would encourage people to learn more about what you're doing and take advantage of the complimentary call is an incredible offering. That could really be good for people. So what else have we not talked about that's important that they need to remember going away from this?
No, I think we've done a pretty good overview today. We've explained that healthful living involves diet, sleep, and exercise, that if you want to be healthy, you have to pay the price. If you want to speed it up, consider medically supervised water-only fasting. Right,
exactly. Great. Okay, well, thank you, and hold on, and we'll say goodbye in the break here. That was Alan Goldhamer, founder of True North Health Center, Dr. Alan Goldhamer, DO, DC, and their site, remember to go take a look at their work, is healthpromoting.com. This is a very brave doctor, a very brave man telling the truth about healing and health in general, which is forbidden information these days, and to stand up against the chilling effect of that kind of censorship takes a lot of courage. And to let people know that the body was designed to heal itself, and that was long before there was any kind of medical industry, natural or otherwise. And we just need to relearn how it was designed to work and then apply it to get the benefits ourselves in our own lives. And we can do that ourselves, but when we're so out of touch with how to do that, having a place to go like True North is really a blessing. So, even the great spiritual teachers like we're looking at in Volume 1 of the Essene Gospel of Peace. And by the way, I recommend that everybody take a look at that book if you haven't seen it yet. Very short, pretty much out of print, but you can still find used copies on Amazon. Volume 1 only, Essene, E-S-S-E-N-E, Gospel of Peace. Essene Gospel of Peace is just the name of the document. And the teacher in there and other ones that we've been talking about have been teaching people how to stay healthy and heal from diseases as a precursor to making it much easier to do the spiritual work that starts internally. And fasting is the core of the whole detox process that precedes really being able to make the best use of good nutrition and other health practices. So And then when the fasting is over, these teachers teach how to live so that you don't fall right back into the same toxic situation, and to do it periodically if necessary if you're living in a very toxic environment. But as Dr. Goldhamer was pointing out, once you get your body in a really clean state, your need for fasting decreases, and you may be able to take care of the maintenance issue of it with intermittent fasting and a very clean diet after that. But learning how to stay physically healthy makes the inner work much, much easier. So right now, if you look around, there's serious health problems of all kinds, even in little kids, just everywhere because of environmental pollution, most of which is intentionally caused by the top-level global rulers in industry and government, which have become essentially merged together. And the system we have, that's called the health system now, is killing millions of people all over the world. And when it's combined with the industries and governments that are poisoning the food and the air and the water, the result is what you see when you look around. So you can tell, I mean, it's just common sense observation that humanity's in the process of being exterminated, along with the biosphere and all life in it. And it's not an oversight, it's not a mistake, it's intentional. So in my opinion, what's important about knowing that is, not to feel bad about it. That's totally worthless. But to be aware of it strategically so you can see the importance of becoming part of the solution to it. And if you really want to do that on a practical level and personally help reverse this, there's just no way around starting with yourself. Your own everyday life habits, your lifestyle, getting your body in shape, which also will get your brain functioning correctly at the same time, and learning how to retrain it away from the programming that we've been given every day to a positive, very specifically practical mental and emotional focus that'll open up all kinds of possibilities for you that you didn't even know about. So, in fact, if you're working for any kind of a good cause and you want to do more good in that cause, you just have to work on yourself, because even if you're saying really wonderful things, if you're totally out of balance in your own body and mind, what you're actually going to be conveying to everybody under the surface of the words you're saying is chaos and contention. And you can see that happening because people, even within very positive causes, are all busy fighting each other to figure out who's better than who else and who's right and who's wrong. All this nonsense distraction away from the actual cause that they think they're working for. So you just got to go back and start on yourself there. I don't think there's any other way unless you're satisfied with just endless fighting, which is exactly what the same global rulers that brought us these situations would like us to waste our time in so they can finish what they're doing. And I think that's not a very good idea. So I suggest that we do something more positive, and inspiring individuals like Dr. Goldhamer are really helpful in resetting the focus toward solutions instead of just problems. And if you want to take the next step, if you want to talk about the kind of things that he teaches, and all kinds of teachers have taught about detox and nutrition and healing and sunlight and exercise and sleep and fasting and grounding and all this stuff. But then if you want to go further too, to start doing the inner work, which is what this sets the foundation for, then if you're brave enough to look at that, I'm inviting you personally to consider joining me in the new form of our Saturday show, which is called the Planetary Healing Club. It's a new format, new platform. It's total video. It's not just radio. And it's a private club format just to give us a little bit more freedom in delving deeply into these things, including individual health and life situations, consciousness situations, so that we can work with everybody in a personal way, not giving medical advice. I'm totally not into that. I'm not a medical doctor. This is sharing old information that I spent about 40 years adapting to using in modern conditions, and I really want to share it with you. So we're going to get into the real details of how to transform your own health and life and everyday life experience, energy level, all this stuff, so you can start getting back to your real normal state, which is something beyond imagination of most people right now, but it's real, it's still there, and you can wake up your own forgotten abilities that used to be normal, and those are so powerful. And you probably won't believe me about this yet, but you'll find out it's true. And you personally have this massive power to help heal the whole world. But you got to start on yourself on very deep levels. And there are ways to do the life changes that avoid the necessity for willpower. This is really a big deal, you guys, because the reason that most of what's called compliance, that means staying on these good programs, doesn't often happen in the long run for a lot of people is because they try to force themselves to have a better lifestyle through willpower, and it's them fighting themselves. And it's like going on some fantastic good crash diet and snapping back and eating nothing but ice cream and pizza as a backlash from it. That's what happens when you try to use willpower, for a lot of people anyway. And we're going to talk about how to do it without willpower so that you can make these changes effortlessly. And I recommend that as a much better way. So this is a big project we're starting. I'd like to have it reach everybody who might be interested in this and who's brave enough to stop criticizing everybody else for a few minutes and really work on yourself. And that's where the hidden PowerPoint is, not just to make your own life incredibly better, but to actually be a major force for helping heal life on this planet. And that's what my ulterior motive is. And maybe it's yours too. So if you're interested in that, go to lostartsradio.com/club, CLUB, lostartsradio.com/club, and join us. You can leave at any time, of course. There's no obligation to anything. It's not a cult or a philosophy or a belief to memorize. I'm totally not interested in doing that kind of stuff. This is real. And this is my attempt to share in a practical way what I've spent a while since the mid-60s putting together. And if you're up to it, I'll meet you there Saturday. So get signed up and ready to go. lostartsradio.com/club. If there's any questions, I'll probably be able to answer them. Just send them to me, richard@lostartsradio.com. But I'm telling you right now that the general ideas and how the club is put together, why we're going to do it as a natural next step when people get interested in nutrition and fasting and all these things and need support and need the next step. It's explained at lostartsradio.com/club. It's not free. We're going to try to use the small dues from it to keep this work going so we can stay on the air and expand the work. And ultimately, I'll tell you too, for full disclosure, we really want to build a school. That takes tons of money, and I don't want to wait on a big investor who may or may not ever appear. I'd like to do it little tiny pieces. If we can get enough people being helped, maybe the little dues will eventually get us to where we could build the school and actually have a chance to demonstrate and experience these things firsthand. I'd have full details for how that needs to be built. If we had the money now, I'd start building it tomorrow, but one step at a time. And in the meantime, this weekly meeting of the Planetary Healing Club will be what we would do in the school, just over electronic media. And I'm going to share every bit of value in that direction that I can with you. See if it's something that you'd like to do, and I hope it will be. And I'll meet you there on Saturday, lostartsradio.com/club. In the meantime, remember to look at Dr. Alan Goldhamer's site, find out more about his work at healthpromoting.com. He's doing a fantastic service for humanity and deserves to be known everywhere. Okay, so thanks for the time and being with us. I really appreciate you guys. And hopefully we'll see you next Saturday on the club meeting, okay? Have a great week, and we'll talk to you then.
As of January 2018, the Saturday live call-in show is now an interactive video platform called the Planetary Healing Club. The cost is just a $10 minimum monthly donation, automatically billed through your PayPal account. Sign up at lostartsradio.com/club. The Planetary Healing Club is every Saturday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. You get your link to participate in the show upon signing up as a member. Those shows are also archived as well for club members. Listen to our new shows with guests every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. All Sunday shows with guests have archives freely available on our website at lostartsradio.com. You can also find them at blogtalkradio.com/lostartsradio, as well as our YouTube channel, youtube.com/C/lostartsradio. Mixcloud at mixcloud.com/lostartsradio. And finally, look us up under the podcast directory on iTunes. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/lostartsradio or on Twitter at Lost Arts Radio. Be sure to join the free Lost Arts Radio Facebook group as well. Just search for Lost Arts Radio Group within Facebook. You can also join our forum on our website if you want to interact with other listeners. We also have links to all of the great independent musicians whose music we feature each week on Lost Arts Radio. When you do your Amazon shopping, please use Amazon's Smile program at smile.amazon.com. And when you choose Lost Arts Research Institute in Sedona, Arizona as your charity, Amazon will donate 0.5% of whatever your order total is to Lost Arts Research Institute to help fund the building of the school and keep our radio show on the air. Please visit lostartsresearchinstitute.org for more information on the school we want to build. Be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter on our site under the Radio Show tab or right from the button on our Facebook page. Contact Richard at richard@lostartsradio.com or myself, Doug Diamond, at doug@lostartsradio.com. Thanks again for listening to Lost Arts Radio, and we'll see you again next week.
When you came to me, and I never believed that you'd rescue me from myself. You saved this girl from a lonely world, and you stay here watching over me. It's more than I ever had wished for, you and me. I'm so lucky you found me. Now our two hearts will be as one. I'm so lucky I got lucky with you. I'm so happy I got lucky. I keep winning when you're around. I'm so lucky I got lucky with you. 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 And you're still by my side, going round and round on this ride. And ups and downs, you keep hanging on. Now here I am, with hopes and dreams and plans. I believe it's all because of you. It's more than I ever had wished for, you and me. I'm so lucky you found